So welcome everybody into Monday Morning MotoGP. It is 10 a.m. Pacific time, Monday morning after a MotoGP race, and this is where we are every Monday morning after a MotoGP race. 10 a.m. Pacific time, we are live here on TikTok, broadcasting the Monday Morning MotoGP podcast in its entirety, live for everyone, right here. So if you want to join, you want to see this exactly hot off the presses, this is where you gotta be. Now, if you miss it live, you can watch the repost over on YouTube at Horsepower Rodeo on our official channel. That's up by Monday afternoon, Monday evening. We do full race recaps. That will be coming shortly. We're also talking about Moto America this weekend because Moto America was in Wisconsin. Lots of big things, but this is basically the entire MotoGP podcast, news updates, headlines, and there's a lot of stuff to talk about. First of all, we're going to talk about Joe Roberts in Moto2. Big win for Joe on Sunday. The first win for the American racing team in Moto2. Huge points haul. He gained some points back. Still second in the championship, nipping on Sergio Garcia's heels. We're going to talk about that race and how he handled it. We're going to talk about Pecco's race in MotoGP, how he executed his plan to perfection despite a 3-place grid penalty from practice. And then, of course, how can we not? We have to talk about Jorge Martin's huge decision to leave Ducati and head over to Aprilia. That's being reported this morning by Italian Motorsports and every motorsports media across the globe. The biggest story in MotoGP probably, so we'll save the best for last. But first, let's talk about Joe Roberts in Moto2. I think going into this season, him going from Italtrans back to American racing, I expected him to get back to form rather quickly. I think he had his mojo going when he was at American racing. It looked like he was MotoGP bound. Aprilia showed interest in him. He wasn't quite ready to make that move. He didn't think the Aprilia was a competitive machine. I think to do over again, he probably would have taken that jump, but you kind of understand a little bit where he was coming from because he was in a very low budget team. This is a team that was barely keeping the lights on at American racing. They were needing an influx of cash. They were just clinging onto a thread, barely being able to pay their bills. And so if you're Joe Roberts and you're competitive with a team that's just struggling to stay afloat, and you look across the aisle and you see a Italtrans who just won a championship with Enea Bastianini, moving over there and taking that Moto2 bike, he thought he was going to be fighting for a title. He thought that team was a way forward in Moto2 to fight for a title and really get some attention in MotoGP. It didn't work out that way. For whatever reason, whether it was the team, whether it was the communication, whether it was American and Italian team, Italtrans has kind of been nowhere since Enea left. They were very competitive with Enea Bastianini, and now, they haven't been competitive in years. Joe didn't have a lot of success on that motorcycle. No one else has ridden that motorcycle has had a ton of success. So he goes back to American Racing Team where he feels at home. They welcomed him back with open arms. They were struggling without him as well. I think they have Marcos Ramirez, who does pretty good. He's been a pretty good pickup for them, but Sean Dillon Kelly didn't really pan out in Moto2 the way everyone thought he would. And Joe comes back to the American Racing Team this season, and I think, like I said, a lot of us thought it was a really good move for him. He'd be comfortable there. He'd be fast there again. He's a very fast rider. And John Hopkins, who kind of runs the team over there at American Racing, said the one thing that Joe Roberts has been lacking in his career is confidence. He's never lacked talent. He's never lacked the ability to put in fast laps. He's never been bad at qualifying. He's actually been pretty decent at qualifying when they give him a good bike. He's been pretty good in the races. He just lacked confidence. This year, he's not lacking confidence. He came back with a vengeance to American racing. He's been on the podium, 4 times now? If you look at the season, let's look at the season because he has been incredible on that Moto2 machine. I'm going to click on him here for a second. That doesn't tell me anything. But he's been kind of on fire, and I think the race this Sunday really tells the story of Joe Roberts in Moto2 this season because he gets pole position, and I think historically the way Joe Roberts needs to win this race in Moto2 is he gets pole position, he has to have the whole shot, and then he just needs to be able to run his rhythm at the front, put in those fast laps lap after lap, and leave everybody behind and just win from the front, kind of like we saw Pecco Bagnaia did. That's kind of how Joe Roberts won in Portimao in that little shortened rain delay race they had a couple years ago, 2022. He got to the front. He was really fast. He passes Jake Dixon, and then he just puts everyone in the dust, and he runs his own pace. He makes no mistakes. He wins the race. I think that's how Joe Roberts would have to win races. If you're talking about a dogfight, a knockdown, mano-a-mano fight with some of the best in the world, Joe wasn't quite there to me. I think when we saw him race in the past, he would get beat up a little bit. He would start going backwards. Well, this weekend, he did start at the front. He did get the whole shot. He stayed at the front of the race for a little bit, but the other riders were coming after him. We had Manu Gonzalez, we had Alonso Lopez, Sergio Garcia, and Aaron Canet, and Ayagura. We're running in a pack of 6 at the front of this Moto2 race for most of it. It looked like a Moto3 race in Moto2. It was one of the best Moto2 races I've ever seen. There was a lot of exchanging at the front. It looked like any one of these 6 guys could win this race at any point in the race. And Joe got beat up a little bit in the middle of this race. He got bumped back to second. He got bumped back to third. He had to make some very aggressive overtakes. He had to get his elbows out. And all of the racing, the most amazing thing about the racing in Italy this weekend was the fact that it was very, very aggressive, but it also felt very clean. They weren't really elbowing each other off the track. They weren't pushing each other into the green paint, off into the gravel. They were just kind of bumping, pushing through, taking smart passes, being aggressive, but also being pretty fair. And at the end of the race, it looked like Joe just willed the win out of this one. It looked like he just wanted it more than the other guys. He was more committed into the corners. He had a plan. He got bumped back to second. He got bumped back to third. He wasn't letting that bother him. He wasn't letting that rattle him. And that would be my knock on Joe Roberts before the season. My knock on him would be, if he got rattled, he'd get a little desperate. He would look a little frantic. He would get ruffled out of his rhythm, and then he would make mistakes. Or he would be faster than the guys in front of him, and he would get impatient. You go, I'm faster than the guy in front of me. I need to pass him so I can move forward. And then he would make a mistake and lose the front, end up in the gravel, or make a mistake and lose even more positions. And so I think this impatience and the ability to, or the patience he's shown to not panic. Let me put it that way. The patience he showed in this race to, when he gets bumped back to second, to not panic, to stay there, to understand he was fast enough that he belonged at the top. And he gets bumped back to third, he doesn't panic. Figures out a game plan, going, no, I know where I'm fast on the track. I know where the guys, I can pass them. I have the bike underneath me that can do it. Let the bike do the work. Let the race come to me. And he did. Fantastic race. He wins the race by 0.06 of a second. Now, in a battle, you have to tell me, knock on him all you want if the only way he can win is from the front. If the only way that this guy can ever win is getting to the front and just riding alone, he's a good rider. This weekend showed Joe is a good racer. He really put his elbows out. He really earned this win against some of the best in the world. So I want to put it to bed that Joe Roberts is going to move to Trackhouse Racing because he's an American rider and they're an American team and blah, blah, blah. If Joe Roberts gets the move to MotoGP, it's because he's earned it. I think more than just Trackhouse Racing should be looking at him. I mean, he's beating the likes of Fermin Aldeguer, who's going to MotoGP. He's beating Ayagura, who I think belongs in MotoGP. He's beating Manu Gonzalez and Sergio Garcia and all these guys. He's competing with them every single week. So if you're looking to Moto2, you're looking to bring up riders. That's where the feeder is down. In this current ecosystem in MotoGP, they're not looking to World Superbike like they used to for their MotoGP riders. They're looking to Moto2. They're looking for fast riders on these prototype machines that can handle the tires and everything that goes along with it. If you're looking at this class, Joe Roberts sits second in the class, only 7 points behind Sergio Garcia. So if you're looking at any of these guys in Moto2 and you're a team in MotoGP, you have to look at Joe Roberts. If you're KTM, if you're Aprilia Factory, if you're Honda, if you're Yamaha wanting to field a satellite team, you have to be looking at this guy. Because right now he's one of the best on a Moto2 bike, week after week. And we heard the criticism. We heard, oh, well, he's fast in Qatar. We'll see how he does in the other tracks. Well, he really likes Portimao and Austin. So those first 3 weeks, we don't really know. We got to wait a little longer, see what happens when he gets to the meat of the MotoGP schedule. We're 7 rounds in now. We're 7 rounds in, and he's number 2 in the World Championship. It's time to show the guy a little bit of respect, American or not. And I tell you, right now with the race this weekend, he more than earned my respect. And you have to love the scenes at the end, at the podium of John Hopkins. I think he was bawling like a baby. American Racing Team's first win, because you have to remember Joe's other win in Moto2 came with Italtrans in that shortened race at Portimao. So this is just huge for American Racing to get that win, to get on that top step, to legitimize their whole project and all their efforts. Pretty big frickin' deal. But let's move on to MotoGP, because MotoGP race was not one of those classic races with lots of overtaking and insane passes at the front, but it was kind of a lesson in managing the perfect race. Because Pecco Bagnaia, it's his home race. Mugello is one of his favorite tracks. He likes to win there. He likes to go fast there. All the VR46 guys, Mugello is a second home to them. I mean, obviously so is Misano, but Mugello really is a second home to Pecco Bagnaia. He's very, very good there. He knows what he's doing around that track. We knew he was going to be fast. So the practice, the incident with Marc Marquez, it's borderline. I don't think he was going that slow in the racing line to deserve a penalty. He did obstruct another rider. Was it intentional? No. But the MotoGP stewards just decide, oh, yeah, that's a penalty. This isn't a penalty. It's the game. It's part of the game. You have to go with it. But on Sunday, I didn't really think 3 places on the grid was going to affect him all that much, because he's so fast at Mugello. So starting from 5th instead of 2nd, unless he just got a terrible start and goes around the first corner in 9th or 10th and just gets swallowed whole, I didn't really expect 5th to affect him that much. And if he had started 2nd and gotten swallowed whole by the pack, what's the difference? He had the speed to run at the front. We saw it in the sprint, and in a 22, 23 lap race, he was going to be there. There was no question. And so when he showed ultra aggression early, we've seen this from Pecco Bagnaia this season. He's been much, much more aggressive early in races to try to get to the front and lead. He would rather lead and manage than kind of fight for it, save the tires, ride in the pack, and then move forward. And I think there's a couple reasons for that. One is the tire pressure thing. That as the rider behind, before the race, you're deciding what kind of race you want to run. It's part of the strategy. So if you are thinking that you're going to lead from the front, you need to make sure those tire pressure on the front tire is up enough that you're going to be over the minimum amount. Because you're not going to be running in a group. You're not going to get a lot of heat on that front tire. It's not going to blow up like you would be running in a group. So you need to put a little more air in it, making sure that at the front, leading the race, you're still going to be within those minimum tire pressures. If you're running in a group, maybe you can go a little bit less, kind of account for that tire blowing up a little bit and being over the limit, but not so much that you lose grip. So before the race, they have to kind of make a decide, like, what kind of race are we going to win? What's our game plan? And it was very obvious that Pecco's game plan was to get to the front as fast as possible. He didn't want anyone disturbing his lines. He knows he can run here. He doesn't need to follow someone around Mugello as a reference. You hear them say that on the broadcast. Oh, he's using so-and-so as a reference. And other riders may need that. Pecco does not need that at Mugello. Pecco doesn't need a reference. He could ride this track blindfolded. So that's one of the big things that when you talk about Pecco's early strategies this year is to get to the front. A lot of it has to do with tire pressure. A lot of it also has to do with Marc Marquez riding a Ducati. Because we know how aggressive Marc Marquez can be. And we saw what happened when Pecco didn't make the decisive move on Jorge Martin and Marc Marquez makes the decisive move on him. And pushes him back a spot, making him lose more points than just, first to second. Now he's riding first to third. And so I think having Marc Marquez and let's give Jorge Martin some credit too. Jorge Martin very, very fast on the same machinery. Pecco doesn't want these guys interrupting his rhythm, and then all of a sudden he looks up, he's in third, he's in fourth, his rhythm's disturbed, and then maybe you have someone like Pedro Acosta or Brad Binder or Aleix coming through. Even Franco Morbidelli has showed some speed. Fabio Di Giannantonio has showed some speed. He doesn't want to start getting swallowed up by the pack. And so when you have someone like Marc Marquez breathing down your neck, the last thing you want to do is have that guy right behind you. Last thing he wants to do is be a reference for Marc Marquez around Mugello, so that he can use Pecco as the reference and tag onto the back of him, follow him around, and then when he's vulnerable, take a lunge. And so it was very obvious from the beginning that Pecco's strategy was to get out front, put some bikes between him and Marquez, hopefully, put some bikes between him and Martin, but at the least, put some time between them. Give him that half-second gap so that he wasn't worried about anyone taking a lunge on him. And if you watched the race, again, this is why I say that races aren't boring, you just don't understand them. If you look at this race and go, oh, it was so boring. No, there was a lot going on. If you looked at the front, it wasn't a battle of overtaking, it wasn't a battle of switching positions, but it was a battle of who was going to make the first mistake, who was going to buckle first. Because Pecco goes and gets this half-second lead. And at one point, he was up to a second. And I can tell you exactly what the strategy was. Pecco was to get to the front, get that second lead. I think he wanted about a second lead. And then at that point, he's going to manage it. He's going to let that lead fluctuate between 7/10 and 1 second. Now that means that nobody from behind him may take a lunge and move up the inside. There's nobody that can disturb his rhythm. He's going to be leading this race with a little bit of buffer. And any time on the pit board he sees that gap come down, then he knows he has to push on the next lap. Then he goes and pulls that out to that second, and then he can go and run a consistent pace, the exact pace he knows he can run at a track he knows so well. Ooh, eye water. Eye water. So if he's running that pace, he knows. I mean, if you looked at his lap times, it was just consistency, 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 a little quicker. Consistency, 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 a little quicker. Now Martin behind him is trying to do the same thing, is trying to push for a few laps, see if he can close that gap, force Pecco into a mistake, because Pecco's made mistakes from the front. And Martin is there to keep the pressure on him. Now I think Pecco wanted about a second, and he was getting about 7/10. 6 to 7/10, he led the race for most of it. And that's where he was sitting. And we saw the gap come all the way down to 2 or 3/10, and then Pecco would go ahead and up the pace and give him those extra 3/10. He always had that in reserve. So every time Martin would make a move, Pecco would go, okay, well, let me go ahead and make a move back. And he's demonstrating to Martin behind him that, listen, man, there's nothing you can do. Anytime you go faster, I'll just go faster. Anytime you think you're making inroads on me, I'll just go a little quicker. And so when you're sitting as Jorge Martin, you're going, okay, I'm getting closer, I'm getting closer, I'm getting closer. This is looking good. And then Pecco pulls out a gap again. It's demoralizing. And you start questioning, well, do I have the pace to actually run this pace? Because I'm pushing as hard as I can, and I'm getting close, but I just can't get there. Because everything I do, this guy's a counter move to. And that's the chess match in MotoGP. That's the thing that people are forgetting. Oh, they're just riding around in circles, and nobody's overtaking each other. This is a different kind of race. Is it as exciting, as flashy as some of the races we've seen this season? It isn't. It's not as exciting, I'll admit it. But it is interesting when you start looking at how the race is panning out. We see it come down to under 3/10 at one point. Mad Will, welcome in. Long time no see. We're talking about Pecco Bagnaia versus Jorge Martin. When you see the way Pecco managed the race, we saw that gap come down to 2.5 And oh, is Pecco in trouble? No. He puts the hammer down. He pulls out 3/10. He's got it managed. And so that's what we mean when we say managing the race at the front. Because, again, these guys can't go balls to the wall 23 laps, burn up their rear tire. They've got no rear tire left. They're finishing 10th. And I keep referencing Australia last season when Martin decided to basically go, hey, screw the rear tire. I'm going to go as fast as I can for as long as I can. I'm going to build a 10-second, 12-second lead. And then when the tire goes, I'll have a buffer and I'll be fine. And he wasn't. He burned the hell out of that tire, and the chasing pack ran him down with 5 laps to go. And his strategy almost worked. He was 1-2 corners. Maybe it was a little more than that, like 3 corners away from winning a race. So it was almost executed to perfection. Those are the razor-thin margins in MotoGP. that the strategy doesn't always pan out. And when it doesn't pan out, it's very, very close. And so Pecco's strategy in this was, let's not burn out the rear tire. Let's keep it consistent. Let's run those consistent paces that we know we can run. When Martin gets close, we'll give it a little more. We'll put a little more tire into it, because Martin has to worry about his tires too, because he's got Marc Marquez behind him. He has Enea Bastianini behind him. So I think this race by Pecco is one of the classiest races we've seen from him. We knew he was going to be strong in Mugello. He showed us how strong he can be. And it's just, it was masterful. I think we have to give Pecco a little credit. I think a lot of people go, oh, he's not a good champion. He's not a worthy champion. They don't like his personality. I think this was a great race from Pecco. It was really good to see him do some crazy celebrations, some Rossi-esque. The kiss celebration, I don't know where that came from. I haven't read too much about it yet, but more power to you, man. And then you have to give your hats off to Enea Bastianini, who rode a really good race. And we talk about managing tires. Enea Bastianini is among the best. He's always so strong at the end of races. He knows how to manage a race. He knows how to run a pace without burning up his tires. And I'm trying to think of the last time we've seen a pass into the last corner at Mugello, the way we saw Enea Bastianini take Jorge Martin. That super tight line, ran so much faster than Jorge. I don't think Jorge was expecting it. I think he thought that he had the race covered off, and Enea somehow comes through with a spectacular overtake in the last corner to take. I will be honest, with 2 laps to go and was like 7 or 8 tenths in his pocket, I did not expect Jorge Martin to lose that position to Enea Bastianini. I just really didn't. But there we were sitting in the last race, and Enea was gaining on him in every sector, hand over fist. And he knew, okay, last lap, I don't have to worry about the tires anymore. Marc Marquez wasn't really a threat anymore to him, so he didn't have to worry about defense at all. He was running his own lines, and they were very, very fast. And again, he's always really, really good at the end of races. So again, plan executed to perfection. He found his rhythm in the middle of the race. He didn't burn up a bunch of tire fighting with Marc Marquez. He makes a decisive move on Marc when he thought he was vulnerable. He was able to gap him, and he was able to set about Jorge Martin. I think even he thought maybe it was a little too much to overcome with only a couple laps to go, but he pulls it off, and it was I promised that I would use the term God-level pass. It was an amazing pass. So we have to take our hats off. Both Ducatis, 1-2 on the podium at Mugello. Big home race for the team. That electric blue on the bike looked amazing. It threw me off at the beginning of the race. I was looking for the red bikes. I was like, who's this blue bike that's winning? Or that's leading the race at the beginning. Really, really pretty bike. Oh, it was a great livery. I like that better than the yellow. Ducati, if you're listening, I like the blue better than the yellow. But great race. I think Jorge Martin was very, very disappointed to lose as many points as he lost to Pecco Bagnaia this weekend. I think 21 points in all that he lost to Pecco, meaning his lead is cut down to 18 points in the championship. And Pecco goes into a 3-week break, and Martin gets to think about his woes on the track as Pecco gets to celebrate for the next 3 weeks, knowing that they're going into Assen. And it's going to be still a dogfight for the championship. It's not going to just be Jorge Martin running away with it. We're going to keep it close. So speaking of Jorge Martin, we've got some news today. And it was not the news I think a lot of us were expecting. So over the course of the weekend, the media kind of broke, well, it looks like Jorge Martin is going to get that factory spot next to Pecco Bagnaia. And I had said that last week when Ducati announced we were not going to make a decision at Mugello. Everyone was kind of thinking they would make a decision at their home race. They would announce the decision of who was going to ride the red bike next to Pecco Bagnaia. And they kind of came out and said, we're not making the decision at Mugello. And one of the representatives went as far as to say, we never said we were. That was the media. They kind of ran with that. We never said we were going to make our announcement. We'll make our announcement in due time. And I think what they were trying to do is basically, well, this isn't a delay. It's a tough decision. And I kind of thought it felt like a delay to me. And the reason it was a delay, it was because the negotiations are very complicated. It's not as just easy as signing one rider. Depending on what rider you signed, there was going to be a domino effect of, riders going here and there. And we have Pramac in the mix, like they could go to Yamaha and leave Ducati. There's so many things in the mix. So it wasn't an easy deal. So I had thought personally that they'd made their decision and now they were just working out the details. And most of the weekend, it looked like I was right, because what I had said is the most complicated deal would be they want to keep both Jorge Martin and they want to keep Marc Marquez both on a Ducati. Now, how do they do that? Well, the first way they do that is they have to give Jorge Martin the factory seat or he was gone. That was piece one. And that's what kind of got announced over the weekend, was that Jorge Martin was going to get that factory seat next to Pecco Bagnaia. Okay, so now they have to figure out how to make Marc happy. How do they keep Marc in the fold? And Marc has said, I want a factory bike. I want the latest spec Ducati. So that's what they have to give Marc to be happy. Well, then what also came out over the weekend was Marc saying, I'm not going to Pramac. It's not an option for me. And I'm going to tell you exactly how I think this conversation went so you can understand how we got where we are. And I think that took a lot of people back. I mean, people in the media room, there was kind of a hush when he said, Pramac's a great team. They've done great things. It's not an option for me. So that threw a huge thing in the works. Everyone's kind of running around the chicken with their head cut off going, well, now, does that mean that Gresini is going to get a 2025 Ducati? Ducati said they're only putting 4 2025s on the grid. Right now, they kind of belong to Pramac in their contract negotiations. If Ducati goes to Pramac and says, hey, we need to take one of your GP25s and give it to Gresini, maybe Pramac takes that deal with Yamaha and walks away from Ducati, which would be a big blow to Ducati's overall infrastructure. So, it looked, I mean, we saw Marc Marquez going into the KTM suite to talk to the KTM bosses, and it looked for a minute like they were valuing Pramac Ducati over Marc Marquez. And as Ducati, I can't blame them. I mean, look at where they're getting their factory riders from. They're getting their factory riders coming up through Pramac. It's a really well-organized team. It's a really competitive team. They won the team's championship. Marc Marquez is flashy and sexy, and you want him on your team, but he's one rider, and he's in his 30s. Losing the deal with Pramac, I think, would have set Ducati back quite a bit. And also going into having these new regulations, having a tried and true top independent team is not something you want to let go. So for the majority of the weekend, it looked like that decision was Pramac Ducati over Marc Marquez. And Marc Marquez to KTM. Marc Marquez riding a gas. Hell, Marc Marquez riding next to Pedro Acosta on the factory team with how Brad Binder's been going lately. Then the news broke this morning. Jorge Martin is going to sign with Aprilia, leaving Ducati, meaning Ducati either reversed their decision, they were still sitting on the fence, leaning towards Jorge Martin, but they really want to keep the shiny prize that is Marc Marquez. They want his riding power, they want his star power, they want him winning a championship for them, and they don't want to let him go to a rival manufacturer. He's too dangerous. We've seen how dangerous he is on the old bike at Ducati. What if you give him a brand new bike like an Aprilia or a KTM? Does he just decimate the field? And so they turned to Jorge Martin and they said, hey, we can't give you the factory ride. It's going to have to go to Marc. And if you want to stay in Pramac, and Jorge Martin, I don't even think, let them finish that sentence. They knew where he stood. Nope, I'm gone. He walks across the street, signs with Aprilia. We'll win a title at Aprilia and you'll be sorry. And so all of that, that's kind of the overview. Now, here's how I think the conversation went, because we heard Marc Marquez earlier in the week say, I'm very clever when I make decisions. He knew how much Ducati wanted to keep him. He knew what leverage he has. And he's one of the only riders in the paddock that can kind of pull this off because of who he is. 8-time world champion. It comes with some benefits. So I think here's how the conversation went. Ducati talks internally. They want to keep Jorge Martin and they want Marc Marquez. They ask them both point blank, what do you need to be happy? Do you need the factory seat? Do you need the factory bike? Do you need money? What do you need to be happy? Jorge Martin says, I need the factory bike on the factory team to be a legitimate factory contender. That's what I need to be happy here. It's time. I've done my time in Pramac. It's time for me to get my reward. So they go to Marc Marquez. They say, Marc Marquez, what do you need to be happy? And Marc says, I need a factory bike. That's what I need to be happy. Now, whether he tells them outright he wants to stay at Gresini with that factory bike, he tells them, I need a factory bike. End of story. If I'm not on the latest spec machine, I don't think I can really compete for a world title. He's seeing how difficult it is on the year-old machine. He's watching Jorge Martin and Pecco Bagnaia be faster than him. His talent bridges a lot of gap, but they are faster than him on the 2024. So then Ducati talks internally and say, okay, Jorge, we want to keep you. We're going to bring you to the factory team. Marc, you'll get a brand new shiny GP25 in Pramac Ducati. And Marc Marquez, at this point, is where he becomes clever. He looks at them dead in the eye and he says, well, I don't really want to leave Gresini. I'm really happy with the team. I love the team. I love Frankie Carcetti. I love Nadia. I love riding with my brother at Gresini. I'm really happy here. You can see it on his face week to week behind the scenes. Marc Marquez is very, very happy at Gresini, riding with his brother in that small team. He doesn't have to worry about corporate events. He doesn't have to worry about all these different sponsorship things. He just gets to ride the motorcycle. So Ducati says, hey, we're going to give you exactly what you want, the GP25 on the Pramac Ducati. And Marc says, I have a counteroffer for you because my name's Marc Marquez and no one tells me where to go. I will stay at Gresini and you will give me a GP25 here. Because I don't really feel like switching one independent team for another. I don't feel like adjusting to a new crew chief. I don't really feel like going through these hoops. I don't have to go through these hoops. I'm Marc Marquez. I'm 8-time world champion. You want to keep me here. And I know you want to keep me here really badly. All that marketing stuff you say I'm worth to the media, everyone you talk to and say, hey, Marc Marquez is, when you talk about marketing and the media portion of MotoGP, there's no one like Marc. No one catches headlines like Marc. That's worth something. So either I stay in Gresini and do that for you on the GP25, or I look elsewhere. I've got offers elsewhere. And that threw Ducati for a loop because they were not expecting that answer from him, I don't think. I think they were expecting him to go, all right, I'll move over to Pramac. It's a good team. It's a fast team, and here we go. But Marc is Marc. He gets to counter. He gets to put Ducati's bluff into action. And not that it was a complete bluff. They want Jorge Martin. They want Marc Marquez to stay in the team. But now Ducati has to go, okay, are we actually willing to let Marc Marquez walk? We can't have all of the cakes we wanted. We can't have the Jorge Martin cake and the Marc Marquez cake. So which one do we really want? And that's where the decision got very, very complicated and difficult. That is where the negotiations had to happen behind the scenes of them figuring out, well, if we can only have one, who is it going to be? And it looks like they went the way of Marc Marquez. It looked like they told Jorge Martin, pump the brakes on this deal. We have to walk away from the negotiation table. Again, we don't know how far along they were. Maybe it'll come out. We'll see. We don't know how far they were down the road of making this deal with Jorge Martin, but they obviously informed him after the Italian Grand Prix that they couldn't just give him the factory seat cut and dry. He says, listen, it looks like you're waffling. I'm out of here. I have other options on the table. And he goes over and signs very, very quickly with Aprilia, which makes Aprilia more competitive. It's a good get for Aprilia. It's a good place for Jorge Martin to be if they can keep manufacturing a good motorcycle. It's not going to be as good as the Ducati. I don't think life at Aprilia is going to be as easy for Jorge Martin as the Ducati. They're a little bit different. The bikes, the way they deliver power, the Aprilia has been known for it's being the agile of the V4 engines, and does not have the blistering top speed of the Ducati. It's no slouch. It wins races. Maverick's done very well on it. Aleix has done very well on it. So I don't think it's a bad move for Martin, but it is a gamble. But he drew that line in the sand. And so this is where I'm saying is that all these riders and the manufacturers, they've drawn their line in the sand. And Ducati could not risk losing Pramac. They could not give a GP25 to Gresini without losing Pramac. I fully believe that's what it meant. And I think that's what Marc meant by being clever, of saying he knows the situation is in Ducati. He knows they're not going to let Pramac walk. So him, by forcing the issue, saying, I want a GP25, but not at Pramac, gave him the best chance at that factory seat. I mean, this is deep chess this guy's playing at this point, because he can afford to, because he's going to have offers that come down the pipe after this Ducati offer. So if Ducati said, you know what, okay, well, sorry, we can't give you what you want, goodbye Marquez, he's got options. He has places to go. He's not destitute. He's not going to be out on the street. He knew he had options. But if he's angling for that factory seat, putting Ducati in a bind, saying, yeah, no, I want the factory seat, but I want it here I want a factory bike, but I want it here at Gresini. Put all the chips in Ducati's corner. They had to push all in now. And were they willing to lose Pramac Ducati by giving Gresini another GP25 and taking one? Pramac was never making that deal. If Pramac was on the fence about Yamaha at all, if they thought that deal was a good deal for them, in the least, they would have walked the minute Ducati was like, hey, we want to take one of those factory bikes and give it to Gresini. Basically meaning Pramac is no longer the independent team. And I think what I had said earlier on some online forums, people were really upset, saying that Ducati was dissing Marc Marquez and that he'll go somewhere else and win all these world titles. They were just valuing Pramac Ducati more than Marc Marquez. But in reality, it feels like they're valuing them both very, very highly, which is why we saw Jorge Martin walk. Now, is it going to be a good decision in the long term? Maybe. I think in the short term, it could be a very good decision. I think it's going to be very tough to manage that garage with Pecco Bagnaia as a world champion and Marc Marquez as a world champion. They are not going to be the friendliest of teammates. They are not going to be buddies. So it's going to be a much tougher atmosphere to manage over at Ducati, whether that affects race results or not. I don't see Pecco really affecting him. I don't think Marc can rattle Pecco like he could early in his career. I think Pecco's just confident in who he is now and is not the type of guy who's going to get rattled by Marc sitting across playing mind games. Marc is definitely not going to get rattled by Pecco being there. Marc is going to get the factory bike he wants. And then the question of Martin, whether or not Martin can be the thorn in Ducati's side. And he'll be very, very motivated to be that. Now, long term, I think this is good for Ducati because I do think keeping Pramac Ducati in the fold is very, very important. I do think if you gave that team up to Yamaha, you would see some problems within Ducati. But also, you're giving a competitor who, yeah, they're not at the top now. They're not your direct competitor right now. But if you think Yamaha isn't going to turn this ship around with the money and resources they have, I think you're kind of silly. They've won a lot of world titles in MotoGP, in motorcycle racing across the world. Yamaha is not just going to sit down and let Ducati run away with it. So if you're not understanding that Pramac going to Yamaha is Ducati losing a very important team to a main championship rival in the years to come, you're delusional. Fabio Quartararo will be competitive on an Aprilia on a Yamaha very quickly. But a very interesting piece of information there. Huge drama. I did not expect to wake up to see that this morning. I kind of thought, all right, well, where's Marc going to ride? KTM? If he's not riding at Pramac, or I kind of expected Ducati to kind of bend to we'll put a fifth GP25. I did not expect them to let Pramac go. But that was a big deal. And finally, in closing, just really, really, really quick before we end the podcast, it broke this morning also that Aleix spot, and also the fact that it doesn't look like Yamaha is going to get a satellite team, that they kind of need the extra infrastructure of having two really good test riders. And so if they had Cal Crutchlow and Aleix Espargaro in their testing program, doing wild cards often, it would kind of be their de facto satellite team. They could almost run a satellite team within Yamaha if they had two really good test riders, because they could have them wild card and test all the time. So I kind of expected Aleix to go there. But Honda makes just as much sense. I was damn sure after he said that the Aprilia test ride was not going to happen and that he was going to leave that ecosystem and start a new chapter. I was pretty sure it was one of the Japanese manufacturers, because I don't think KTM need him with Danny Pedrosa there and Pol Espargaro there. I also don't think he was going to kick his brother out of a test rider seat in order to take it. Ducati doesn't make a whole lot of sense. They have a program that just seems to work, and they're developing a bike the way they want to develop it. Why bring in a high-paid test rider? So it did feel like it was going to be Yamaha or Honda, and it looks like it's going to be Honda. And not a bad person to develop a bike, because Aleix isn't the most naturally talented rider. He's not a rider to ride around all the problems of a bike, kind of like Marc Marquez is. He's a very analytical, very hardworking rider who has to kind of build up and kind of make his way with the bike and really develop it. And so now with someone like Aleix testing for Honda, you're going to get a lot of experience behind the testing team. We'll see what they do with Stefan Bradl. I didn't read too deeply into whether Stefan's staying with the program or Aleix will just replace him. And it'll depend who they keep in the factory team. If Luca Marini stays, they now have 2 riders. Again, you can say what you want about Luca Marini, but Luca's very analytical. He doesn't make snap judgments. He doesn't make emotional decisions. He makes very calm, calculated choices. And so now you have 2 riders who, again, may not be the most talented riders on the grid, but they know how to get the most out of a MotoGP bike, and they've been successful where they've gone. They've won races, they've got podiums, they've competed for titles. So I think Honda now hopefully can find a direction that puts them back near the top, because I do think MotoGP is better when the manufacturers are competitive and no one is just, sitting around having 4 bikes either crashing out of every race or riding around in last place. Now that does it for this episode of Monday Morning MotoGP. Again, every 10 a.m. Pacific time after a race weekend, we are right here talking to you about MotoGP and all the headlines and everything that's going on in the world of motorcycle racing. Thank you so much for joining me live here on TikTok. If you miss it live, if you miss the live show, we repost this on our YouTube channel at Horsepower Rodeo on YouTube. So you can catch it there forever, and all the other podcasts are there. A lot of longer form content is there on YouTube. So make sure you're liking, following, sharing here on TikTok, and then going over to YouTube and subscribing as well and helping us grow there so we can reach as many MotoGP nuts as possible.